I see a red light. We going? All right. Thank you. Good job. All right. We're in the middle of a series on the book of John. So if you've got your text of choice, well, Bible of choice, the text you want to open to is John chapter 7. We're going to be beginning chapter 7 today. I'm kind of excited about this one, just because as I was going through this passage, the Bible sometimes, is distant in the sense that it's talking about stuff long time ago, and sometimes you're like, well, I feel kind of apart from it. I wasn't there. The culture that was happening, everything, you kind of have to get your mindset in that, and you can try to connect with it on that level. But this one, as I was going through it more and more of it just seemed like, wait a minute, this is talking about today and right now, and so applicable for us and our culture. So I'm excited about it. So usually, I have some kind of intro. Don't really have that today, so we'll just hop right into John chapter 7, verse 1. After these things, Jesus was walking in Galilee, for he was unwilling to walk in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. All right, so that very first song we sang today, Open the Eyes of My Heart, as we were singing through that, it reminded me of the first verse here, and that as I look at Jesus and as he walked, he was always had his eyes open. He was always paying attention to what was going on around him. And he was picked up on the fact that, some people were not too happy with him, and they were trying to kill him. And we had a conversation this week at our house as I was bringing this verse up, and we were talking a little bit about it. Like, Jesus, being God, knew a lot of stuff that probably a regular human person didn't know. So how did that work out in his life? Like, when he was playing games with his brothers and sisters, if they were playing hide and seek, was that just no fair to play with Jesus? So the kids and I came up with a few scenarios or a few different ways he could have handled it. One would have been he just knew everything, right? That's one way it could have happened. Two, he could have turned off part of his God knowledge when he was playing games to make it seem fair. Or three, or to really experience the human, aspect of that. As he was waking up in the morning and putting his feet on the ground, and his brother's waiting outside the door to spook him when he walks out. Get to go, oh, I see you there. He turns around. It's like, dang it, I can never get you, Jesus. Can never surprise you. Or did he turn that part off so he could get the human experience of being, scared or spooked by him? Or three, does he actually know, but he pretends he doesn't know, just to play along? Kind of like if we're playing a game and one of us accidentally shows our hands while we're looking away, everybody else knows what cards we have, but they pretend like they didn't see it, and they play anyway with the knowledge that, I'm just going to play the way I would have even if I didn't know what the cards were. Whichever one it is, I don't know if we'll ever fully know. Maybe we can ask Jesus when we get there. Did you actually know everything that was going to happen while you were here as human? Or, how did that work exactly? Regardless of that, he's paying attention, though, and whether he had supernatural knowledge of, the actual people that were there and what they wanted to do, or whether he just had the general sense of, I can pay attention, look and see what's happening around me. They're not happy with me. They're wanting to kill me. So this is the situation I'm going into. So whichever one it is, he's headed down to a feast. And in verse 2 says, now the feast of the Jews, the feast of booths, was near. So his brothers said to him, move on from here and go into Judea, so that your disciples also may see your works which you are doing. For no one does anything in secret when he himself is striving to be known publicly. If you are doing these things, show yourself to the world, for not even his brothers believed him. And this year in 2022, the Passover, the celebration of Passover on the Jewish calendar just wrapped up about a week ago. That happens roughly, obviously, around Easter for us. This is the booths here. The Festival of the Booths is one of three big festivals that the Jews are called to make a pilgrimage or travel to Jerusalem for. One's Passover. The next one coming up in a few weeks is the Feast of Weeks. And then after that is the Feast of Booths. It's the third one. And this year it's going to happen October. It's between Heather's birthday and Hannah's birthday. So like the 10th through the 17th, something like that. Middle of October. And we're not going to go into all of the background of the Feast of Booths because I think it probably belongs in the next sermon or the sermon after, depending on how we break the verses up, on how Jesus relates to it. But there are a couple of things that I want to point out later on that having just a background of the Feast of Booths will help with. So again, it was one of the three. It's the last three in the kind of Jewish calendar for the year, and it celebrates harvest, the end of harvest. So everybody's gathered up all their grain pretty much, and it has a dual purpose in the Bible. And it was instituted in Leviticus. So in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 33, this is how it was instituted for them. On the 15th day of the 7th month, and for 7 days is the Feast of Booths to the Lord. On the first day what shall be a holy convocation, and you shall not do any work, ordinary work. For 7 days you shall present food offerings to the Lord. On the 8th day you shall hold a holy convocation and present food offering to the Lord. It is a solemn assembly, and you shall not do any ordinary work. On the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered all the produce of the land, you shall celebrate the feast of the Lord for 7 days. On the first day will be solemn rest, and on the 8th day solemn rest. And you shall take on the first day fruit of the splendid trees, branches, palm trees, and burrows of leafy trees, and willows, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. And you shall dwell in booths for 7 days. All native Israelites shall dwell in booths, that your generation may know that I made the people of Israel dwell in these booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So it was instituted for dual purpose. Biblically, it looks like. One is basically a celebration of the harvest, finishing up God providing grain and food. And secondly, as the nation of Israel got brought out of the land of Egypt and provided for them all the way, those two concepts are connected because during that time, God was providing for them in abundance for their need as they wandered in the wilderness. So provision and escape, provision and safety and protection is a celebration of this Feast of Booths. And like I said, Jesus is going to make a connection to that in the verses after where we're going to conclude today in verse 24. So I'll leave some more diving in depth into this festival for whoever preaches the next couple weeks. But this will have one tie-in connection, and so we wanted to give a little bit of background on the Festival of Booths for the sermon today. The Jews seem to have a lot of parties, though. They seem to have a lot of feasts and festivals. Yeah, and if I was going to make a religion, I probably wouldn't do it without parties and feasts and festivals. No offense to some of the ones out there that some of my friends belong to, but it's like, what do you mean you don't celebrate birthdays? Anyway, I'm kidding. Anyway, so as we do this, as we look at look through this passage anyway in verse 2, so this is the context is they're talking about going up, and then Jesus and his brothers have a conversation. And if I were to pick a verse in the Bible to demonstrate that I know the inevitability of having relational difficulties in life, it would probably be, this verse would be a good one to go to. So has anybody had issues with family members or friends or brothers or sisters or bosses or whatever else? And, as you look through history and you look through your own life and everybody else that you know's life, they've got problems with people in life. And I look back at this verse and go, okay, if Jesus had problems with his brothers, what hope is there for the rest of us? The original brothers in Genesis had problems. That ended up in death for one of them. Thankfully, in this passage, it didn't end up in death. But the first reading time I read this, and I kind of put my inflection on it in there, it seems like the brothers are just trying to get him to show people who he is, right? It seems like they're making a decent request. It doesn't seem necessarily wrong or anything on my first reading, but then John adds that very last line. And that very last line says, not even his brothers believed in him. And so as I got to reading this again, if you go back to the top and read it, you go, okay, well, what were they actually asking? If they didn't believe in him, it seems like their motives for asking him to do this weren't exactly, I don't know, they weren't sincere. So what were they trying to get at when they're prodding Jesus to do this? They're kind of poking at him a little bit, it seems like. Hey, you're this great magician kind of guy. Why don't you go show the world? Hey, we're about to go have a big party. You can be the centerpiece of this party if you go down and do some magic tricks, right? So why would they be doing this? I don't know if they were, jealous that Jesus was getting a ton of attention. He did miracles at the wedding. Hey, Jesus got celebrated. He saved the wedding. He got lifted up on the chair with the bride and groom going around. Thanks for making wine at the wedding and stuff like that. Maybe they were mad because they were playing hide and seek again, and before they started, he was like, "You're going to hide here, and you're going to hide here," and he's like, "Come on, Jesus, we can't even start the game without you telling us what's happening." We're not exactly sure, what the brothers' motivation were. Whether they generally were like, "Okay, well, if you are this great, Messiah person, let's go up to Jerusalem. Let's have the real people, the real leaders of the Jewish, faith." Test you and see if you are who you really are, or they could have been just like, just Jesus guy's at it again. Why don't you go do some magic tricks? Whatever the motivation, again, Jesus has a chance to respond to them. And there's several ways you can respond when you're being poked at or prodded at or being made fun of. And let's take a look at Jesus' response. Verse 6. So Jesus said to them, "My time is not yet here, but your time is always ready. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify about it. Its deeds are evil. Go up to the feast yourselves. I'm not going up to this feast, because my time has not fully yet arrived." Now, having said these things to them, he stayed in Galilee. But when his brothers had gone up to the feast, then he himself also went up, not publicly, but as though in secret. All right, so we're going to deal with 3 points in this section. One is his direct response, and his response is to stick to the truth that relates to the situation. I was having a conversation again with the kids this week, and it was in terms of conflict, in dealing with conflict and people prodding you and poking you. And I made a comment to them, and Heather and I have made it several times, is you cannot let people dictate how you behave. And what I mean by that is, no matter how they are poking and prodding at you, you don't get to lose self-control in your reaction to them. You get to control your reaction to what someone else is doing to you. And here, Jesus doesn't lose self-control. He doesn't go, say, well, they're making fun of me, I'm going to go break their dolls, or, whatever the case may be. He doesn't lose self-control. What he does is sticks to the point and sticks to the truth, what is true in that. And he says, you guys can go ahead and go, but it's not my time yet. He's more concerned about the timing and God's will for his life than his reaction to the people that are poking and prodding at him. So 2, Jesus confronts evil with that timing versus the timing and the intent. Blah, blah, blah. Let me try that again. The timing, it seems like, to me, is back in the context of the Jews wanting to kill him. And he goes, okay, well, if I go now and present myself publicly in my works, that may be the end result. And it's not time yet. The Father and I, in our timing, have not decided yet. The reason that the world is against me wanting to kill me is because I'm dealing with sin issues that are happening in the world. You guys aren't subjugated to the same timing. You can go whenever you want. Now, the timing of the brothers may be a few different things. One, you can go whenever you want because you're not Jesus. They're not looking to kill you. So you can go up to the feast just regular, and it's fine for you to go. 2, it could be for the same reasons that Jesus is talking about in terms of sin in the world, that the brothers don't believe in him, and so they have no real tie into his ministry. And so, go up to the feast, do what you're supposed to do as Jews. Could be a couple of different things that why he's saying that your time is, ready, opportune. You can go whenever you want. You have the freedom to do that. Or it could be that they're not caring about the will of God, and so they don't have to worry about the will of God, so they can just pick whenever they want to go. It doesn't really matter. all those, as I read that passage, and particularly the opportune time for the brothers, that confused me. I wasn't really sure what Jesus was talking about. It seems to me that one of those, explanations probably fits. However, Jesus is more concerned, though, about his timing and the Father's timing than it is with a response to being poked and prodded by his brothers in this situation. The third thing we got to deal with in this passage, and as I read it the first time, and you guys probably picked up on it too, and the world would probably ask this question is, well, is Jesus a liar? Is Jesus a liar? What did we just see? Jesus told his brothers, you guys go up, I'm not going up to this feast. They take off, then he comes behind them and does go to the feast. So is Jesus a liar? I don't think so. As a Christian, I don't think so. But textually, I don't think so either. I think John really makes that clear in the last part of that. He went up not publicly, but though in secret. So if John was trying to present Jesus as contradictory or a liar, he probably wouldn't have followed up with that statement. So the whole point that the brothers were trying to make of Jesus is you need to go publicly, you need to go make a big scene about this if you are this Messiah, if you are this person. And God and Jesus are saying, it's not my time yet. That's not how I'm going to go up to this feast. He's not saying, I don't think that he's not going to go ever. He's just saying, one, it's not the time for me to go right now. And number two, I'm not doing it how you're going to want me to do it. And we've all either run into that situation in our lives or seen that where somebody's going, oh, you need to go to the movie. You need to go to the movie. And somebody goes, well, I'm going to go to the movie, but it's not because you're making me. I'm going to because I want to, right? Or whatever the situation is. Jesus is making a point here that I'm going to go in the timing that is right. Number one, I'm not doing this because you're poking and prodding me, and I'm not going to go in the way that you want me to go. I'm not going to go be the magician and make a scene. He's going not publicly again, but in secret. So I don't think Jesus is a liar in this particular passage. So that at least maintains his righteousness and holiness. So that's a good thing, I suppose. Verse 11, we get to the feast. So the Jews were looking at him at the feast, saying, where is he? And there was a great deal of talk about him in secret among the crowd. Some were saying, he's a good man. Others were saying, no, on the contrary, he's misleading the people. However, no one was speaking openly about him for fear of the Jews. So first thing here is the Jews. There's three different groups of people here. So there's the Jews, the capital J, that are the Jewish leaders, because pretty much everybody going to the feast were Jews. So John's making a distinction here, I think, between the Jews, capital J, which are the Jewish religious authorities, the crowds, which were Jews as well, but just the everyday folks who are coming. Then you've got Jesus and, his personality as well coming. So they're looking for him. The Jews are looking for him, and they expected him to be there, which is interesting. They expected him to be there. Now, it could be because he's shown up at other feasts and festivals because he's a good Jew and following the law in that sense. So they could have been because they knew he was performing miracles, that he was making a scene in a sense, that he was causing ripples in their community, that they expected him to be there and start proclaiming something. But what was the purpose of this feast, going back again? The purpose of this feast was a celebration. It was a joyous occasion for thanking God for provision of the harvest and for getting them out of the desert. And what was their focus as Jews, as the religious leadership? Was it focused on joyous celebration of the harvest and the salvation of the Jewish people? No, it was how can we use this to get back at Jesus, to find Jesus. Their motives weren't pure in coming up to this festival. And so as we're going to see in a couple of weeks, Jesus' response to this festival as he gets up and interacts with it a little bit. But I think there's a contrast to be made between the Jewish religious leaders using a religious institution and celebration for their own purpose, for their own power grab, for their own defense, fearing that somebody, namely Jesus, was going to come in and take over their religion. They were going to remove power from them, and they were using this celebration, a God-given institution, not for its intended purpose, but for their own power, for their own selfishness. 2, the prevalent misunderstandings about Jesus were the same back then as they are now. What do they say about Jesus? The crowd say, some say he was a good man. Others were saying he's an evil person or bad. No, on the contrary, he's misleading people. Those are the same types of arguments and the same misunderstandings of Jesus that we hear in our culture today. They haven't changed much. If you've listened to a lot of the current new atheists, Sam Harris is one of those. If you don't know who Sam Harris is, he's a scientist and neuroscientist, philosopher. And he was asked one time in a Q&A in the last couple of years about the difference between Jesus and Muhammad. And he made the comment that those two, you have to really separate them and look at their lives, and that Jesus really was a pacifist hippie, and he was a good guy and got killed for it, got crucified for it. So, you have Sam Harris going, he was kind of a good guy. He was a hippie pacifist, turn the other cheek kind of a guy. And then you have other people in our culture today, doctors, PhD people, who say, no, Jesus was evil. And this actually is a little bit harder for me to understand. I can at least understand the kind of viewpoint that Jesus was just a good teacher, hippie guy. A lot of the things he said, as you look at his life, you look at his teaching, they aren't, tells them to put their swords away, and when he chops the ear off of the guy, Peter, and, it says, turn the other cheek, that kind of thing, let's love our neighbors. So I kind of get that understanding, how you could get that view of Jesus. The evil side's a little harder for me to understand, but there's a doctor, I forgot his name now, but anyway, he wrote a book called Bad Jesus, The Evil of the New Testament Morality. And here's Dr. Richard Carrier's comment on him. In various places, quote, Jesus was like all the other failed Jewish warrior messiahs who were supposed to defeat the enemies of Israel and put Jerusalem back on top. Christian apologists often try to paint Jesus as a stark contrast to those sensibilities and cast Jesus instead as the good Messiah. But Jesus' army was just invisible. His intentions to conquer the world and for the nation of Israel could not even be attempted. So all we're left with was the supposed peace-loving hippie Jesus mythology that the Gospels, and he never got around to committing his atrocities because his angelic military was fake. This doesn't change, however, Jesus' intentions, what they clearly were, and that was to commit atrocities and genocide. This is a doctor. This is a doctor writing this down, right? Well, so that viewpoint is out there. This is not something that has gone away, And again, it's the same comments that were made at the time and when Jesus was actually walking around. I think that's because even though our technology has changed over the years since Jesus was here and since the original Adam and Eve and two brothers were here, human nature has not changed. All we've found is better and neater ways to have our sin nature exposed, I think. All we have now is video cameras to put clips up on the internet and expose the same human nature that has always been around. That will never get better, no matter what amount of technology we produce. And hey, I like technology. I'm in technology. It's a neat thing and cool things. I like medical technology and what it can do for the issues I'm having as I get older. I'm happy for those things. But at the same time, none of that can change basic human nature. We'll come back to that in a minute as we do some applications. Number 3 out of this passage, or this particular part of the passage, though, in verse 11 through 13, is fear can curtail honest and open communication, particularly here about Jesus. You see the people are talking and discussing themselves, but they're afraid to do it out in the open because of the Jews. The Jews are using their power and their fear of them to curtail open dialogue about who Jesus was. Now, that didn't stop the dialogue. That didn't stop them talking about Jesus, but it certainly curtailed it. Jesus and his will and the Father's will find a way, regardless of what we try to do. Back in 2011, I think, and I've probably said this before, but I met somebody who came out of the Muslim world and talk about Jesus, was pretty discouraged there. You know, there's a lot of laws and things where if you commit a certain crime, you're beheaded for it. You know, and you know that takes care of second offenders pretty well. But you know, the path that Jesus chose to spoke to him was through a dream. You know, and prior to this, you know, in meeting these people, it was always something I heard about. You know, but it was like, oh, that's some weird mystical stuff that doesn't really happen. But I met him, and he said, you know what, I kept having a dream. I had a dream one night that this guy named Jesus came and talked to me and said, you need to go around the corner to this organization, to this church, and meet with some nuns. And he was like, what is this weird dream? And he had the dream again, and he had the dream again. And he went, and he talked to those nuns and became a Christian, you know, converting from Islam. And you go, God and Jesus will find a way. Even if free speech is curtailed, no matter what happens, the will of God cannot be overcome. And the will of God will overcome, cannot be undone. There we go. That'll work. Verse 14. But when it was in the middle of the feast, Jesus went up to the temple area and began to teach. The Jews were then astonished, saying, how has this man become learned, not having been educated? So Jesus answered them and said, my teaching is not my own, but his who sent me. If anyone is willing to do his will, he will know about the teaching, whether it is of God or I'm speaking from myself. The one who speaks from himself seeks his own glory, but he who is seeking the glory of the one who sent him, he is true, and there's no unrighteousness in him. All right, so Jesus makes his appearance, a public appearance, and I want to differentiate that again from what his brothers were wanting him to do. His brothers were wanting him to do wonders and signs, and what did Jesus do when he went out publicly? Was teaching, right? It wasn't a big magic show in the middle of the feast. He went up and was teaching. He was talking truth with people in the middle of the feast. Well, why did he choose the middle of the feast? Why does John point out it's the middle of the feast? Well, I'm sure all of us have family, neighbors, etc. When you say the party's going to start at 2 o'clock, they show up at 4 o'clock. Or if the party's at 2 o'clock, they get there at 1:45 and they're gone by 2:30, right? So Jesus is at the height of the feast where everybody is still there. The early comers are still there. They haven't left yet. The late comers are there and haven't overstayed their welcome yet. So he's at the middle of the feast, maximum amount of people there. And again, he goes up, I think, not to show, he's got a big crowd now, not to show his magical tricks, but to impart wisdom, teaching and truth to these people. So then they look at this and go, wait a minute, they recognize something about this teaching that he's doing, the Jews do. They say, how is he speaking in this way, talking about the things we know about so well? You know, it's like an algebra teacher sitting around having an algebra conference, and this person comes in, says, I've never been to school ever, but I know the Pythagorean theorem, and this is how it works. And they're going, well, what's your initial question? Well, where did you learn this? Were you a child genius? Did you just come up with it yourself? Or how did this work? And Jesus says, no, it's not from me. And they're saying, well, you didn't learn it from one of us, and we're the great teachers. So you weren't educated in the sense by us. So where did it come from? And Jesus, the implication is you did it by yourself. You came up with this all on your own. And Jesus is going, no, I didn't learn it from you, but I didn't come up with it on my own either. It's from God. And how do I know that? Or how would you know that? How do we know that? He is the Son of God. And the more you know the Son of God, the more you know the Father, the more you can tell and distinguish whether what Jesus is saying is really from him or it's from God. How do you tell the fake? I've used this illustration before as well, I think. In my own, my own day job is protecting, hopefully, the bank that I work at and people's money that they put in that bank from people who want to try to get into it illegally. And we teach tellers how to spot fakes of money, bills. How do we teach them to do that? By teaching them every single way that people can make a fake? No, you teach them to intimately know the real thing so that when the fake thing comes, they go, that's not right. And give me a minute, I can point it out where it's fake, but I know that's not right because I know the real thing so well that this thing is wrong. So you have to be intimately familiar with the real thing to really know the fakes. If I walk outside that door and Heather comes up and she's like, I'm really hungry. I'm like, okay, let's go to lunch. How about we go have sushi? And she's like, I don't want sushi. That's disgusting. Be like, wait a minute. That's a fake. You're not my wife. What alien are you, right? I know the real thing, hopefully, so well and so intimately that I can tell a fake when it's presented. And that's what Jesus is saying. He's saying, if you are so connected with the will of God, with the will of the Father, you'll be able to tell whether what I'm saying, if I'm making it up, or whether it truly is the will of the Father. 4, it's subtle here, but John equates Jesus with God here, and really Jesus does in and of himself. That last sentence, but he who is seeking the glory of the one who sent him, he is true, there is no unrighteousness in him. Whenever John in his writings relates something to true in terms of a personality, it's always of God. So in this one little sentence or phrase, clause at the end of this, John is saying this guy is God. Jesus is God. He's saying he is true. There is no unrighteousness in him whatsoever. Verse 19, did Moses not give you the law, and yet none of you carries out the law? Why are you seeking to kill me? And the crowds answered, you've got a demon. Who's seeking to kill you? And Jesus answered them, I did one deed, and you are all astonished. For this reason, Moses has given you circumcision, not that it's from Moses really, but the fathers, and even on the Sabbath you circumcise a man. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses will not be broken, are you angry at me because I made an entire man well on the Sabbath? Do not judge by outward appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. So first thing we have here, first thing that I want to point out on this section is that, I don't want to phrase it like this. I will, and then I'll clarify it. So when is it okay to break the law? That can get you into a slippery slope. So I remember Joel one time was climbing a fence and gashed his leg open pretty bad, and we had to go to the hospital. And Heather was sitting with him with his leg wrapped in cloth in a back seat, and we were going in our Toyota Sienna, and I did exceed the maximum posted speed limit on the way to the hospital. And afterwards, Hannah, it was either Hannah or Joel, said, well, what would have happened? Hannah's pointing, me. What would have happened if a cop stopped you? You were breaking the law. And I said, well, hopefully the cop would have escorted us to the hospital. And then after that, if you want to give me a speeding ticket, maybe. But there are exceptions to the law based on the circumstance that is happening. You have to really evaluate the situation and what's the intention of the person. Why are you doing this? We set up speed limits so that everybody can safely go about society okay, right? But there's times when an emergency is happening, when going faster than the speed limit is going to save somebody's life, like ambulances or policemen, where they can go faster than the posted speed limit. And so it's about, I don't want to say the spirit of the law, but it's about righteousness and how you're approaching it as opposed to the written words that are down on a piece of paper. And Jesus is going back to that saying, okay, you guys circumcise people on the Sabbath. You're not supposed to do any work on the Sabbath. You're not supposed to circumcise people even, but you do it anyway. Why? So that you can pay attention to what Moses, and not Moses, but the fathers gave down to you, in terms of how you're to present yourself as righteous as a society. So there's times in which you do that, and now you're getting mad at me because I healed someone, I made someone whole on the Sabbath, I fixed somebody, and you're getting mad at me about that. So let's take a look at this. Let's not judge a book by its cover, kind of is what he's saying towards the end of that. So how do we deal with this? And Jesus is going, okay, that famous passage back in Matthew that's taken out of context so well, don't judge lest you be judged. But if you follow that through, and I think Ian brought this up a couple of weeks ago, the judgment is, it's not saying don't judge. It's saying if you're going to judge, you better have the righteousness of God's judgment and not your own judgment. Excuse me. And the judgment that you're taking, The world better be mad at the judgment because that's what God is saying and God is stating, not because you're placing something that you want to in this judgment. Right after that, 2 verses after that, and even in this, it's obvious that he's calling to make us some judgments in some sense, right? Because you couldn't make a righteous judgment if you didn't have a standard by which to judge. So he's not saying don't judge. He's saying that the righteousness you bring to your judgment better be of God and not of yourself. And so Jesus is saying, even in this, you guys are getting upset, but if you judge this righteously, you'll see I am doing the will of God. 2, personally for us, that requires some humbleness in that judgment. Maybe I am wrong. I don't know how many times I've been wrong in my life, a lot. And then there's even times when I thought I was absolutely right. It is at 2 o'clock. Heather's like, no, it's at 3 o'clock. It's at 2 o'clock. I look at the calendar, I look at the schedule. Nope, it's at 3 o'clock. Well, it was at 2 o'clock Mountain Time. I will be right. It takes some humbleness. You got to have some humbleness because, again, you're fallible, I'm fallible, and it better be looked at through the lens of righteousness and God, not your own. All right, so as we wrap up, how do we apply some of this? We talked about some of these wrong views about Jesus have been around forever. They're the same views now as they were then. How in the world do we deal with it now when they were actually with Jesus and saw it in person? I've heard people talk, when I've been talking about God or talking about Jesus, they'd say, well, if only he'd come right now and show me a sign, then I'd believe in him. I'm going, we have...
When they were looking.
When they were looking at him in the face, right? Show us a sign. Well, I've already done 5 signs. You don't get any more. You're like Jonah. But let's talk about the moon landing. That's in our lifetime, at least the age range of this crowd's lifetime. There's people out there that believe it was a fake. We have video evidence of it happening. Well, if only God sent us a video, then I believe. Well, no, because we have people who say the moon landing was a fake, I think going back to that human nature aspect of it, it's not about evidence, right? It's not about evidence. It's about what Jesus said he was coming to do with the world. It has to go back to that sin nature he was talking about. We don't want to see who Jesus really is because we don't want to be confronted with our sin, because we want to live our lives the way we want to live them, that we can look at this evidence and go, not really. He was a good guy, he was a nice hippie, or he was an evil man, because we don't want to really deal with what Jesus was coming to tell us, what he was really doing for us. So how do we deal with that in our own lives as we witness to those types of people? 1, we better be intimately familiar with God and Jesus so we can tell the fake teaching from the non-fake teaching. 2, waiting on God's timing is difficult. How do we do that? We saw Jesus do that, make an example of that, and that's one of those spiritually things you hear. I'm sure there's lots of books and seminars and conferences out there on how to wait on God's timing. But just taking some examples from Jesus in this passage on how to wait on God's timing. 1 is patience. You just got to wait sometimes. We are so busy and hectic in our lives these days in the American culture. Don't feel sorry for us. We did it to ourselves. But what does our family schedule look like in the last week? Monday, I go to work, get off 15 minutes early, go to soccer practice with Joel, run his practice. After that, Hannah's soccer practice. We get home, eat, go to sleep. Wake up on Tuesday, school and work. I go home, worked on the sermon some. Wednesday, wake up, go to work, get off 15 minutes early, run his practice. Her practice ran over by an hour because we were scrimmaging another team. Got home at 9:30, got dinner, got to bed. Thursday, Joel had a soccer game, had to leave. Left work on time that day, got to soccer, got home, got Brahms. We've ate out a lot this week. Got Brahms on the way home, ate dinner, went to bed. Friday, soccer practice, karate. Friday, what did we do Friday? Goalie camp, karate. Saturday, had a soccer tournament, 2 games yesterday. Today, we got a soccer game, 4 p.m. We are so hectic as a society nowadays, especially as parents. And I'm sure it was that way when I was younger, but maybe not, I don't know. But we cram so much stuff in our day. We want it to be now, immediate, fast, let's go, move, next thing, what do we have next? that we don't take the time to be patient, that we don't take a minute and say, okay, God, what do you really want us to do? So a lot of times it takes patience. Psalms 37:7, be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. It takes patience and it takes seeking the will of God. And how do you do that? Again, there's probably lots of books and conferences on that. But again, that goes back to intimately knowing, I think, God. It's going to help you so much in knowing the will of God. You've got to know the real thing really, really well, and you'll be able to spot when the will of God is not happening or in which direction you want to go. Sometimes there's a multitude of ways, paths forward, and some of them, there may not be a right answer. There may be a will of God in here, but there are probably, and there are some not will of God things over here. And you can knock those things off the table pretty easily. And that comes by intimately knowing the Father and Jesus. Wrapping all that up, how do we then take that and go to these people who have these wrong views about Jesus that persist even to today? The only thing we can do is what Jesus did in his response to his brothers, I think, and that's stay on point of what is truthful. Go with that. We don't make personal attacks. We're patient. We wait on the will of the Lord, and that we ultimately pray and hope that they see Jesus for who he really is and worship him for fully being God, fully being man, coming and saving us from our sins, dying on the cross. Let's pray. God, we thank you for this time today. We thank you for the book of John and just the example that Jesus gave on how to respond when we're being poked and prodded into taking a certain path. And I pray that we're taking time to be patient and waiting on you, and that we're getting to intimately know you so that we can know your will. Help us just as a culture, God, hectic and busy. And if you are not a part of that hectic and busyness, God, help us to put you into that. Help us as we walk in this world that doesn't see Jesus for who he is. Help us to be humble in that approach, because I'm sure I have some wrong views about Jesus, that I don't know everything about you. Help us, though, to point to you so that they themselves can go to you and in that righteousness that you have. In Jesus' name, amen.